They called it healing. Experiments on twins at Auschwitz, freezing prisoners to death at Dachau, sterilization programs that carved through hundreds of thousands. When the camps opened in 1945, the world saw what doctors had become under the Reich. White coats stained with systematic murder. But here's what they don't tell you. Most of these doctors never faced trial. They slipped through cracks, changed names, fled to South America, or worse, got recruited by Allied intelligence. What happened to Nazi doctors after World War II? The answer will make you question everything you thought you knew about post-war justice. Between 1933 and 1945, over 350 German physicians participated directly in Nazi medical crimes. They weren't fringe lunatics. These were university professors, department heads, respected researchers, men like Josef Mengele at Auschwitz, who selected victims for gas chambers and conducted twin experiments. Zygmunt Rascher at Dachau, who froze prisoners alive to test survival limits. Karl Klauberg, who sterilized thousands of women with acid injections. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, these doctors scattered like roaches when lights turn on. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Nuremberg trial records and declassified CIA documents. Now back to the story. The Allies knew they had a problem. Operation Paperclip, launched in August 1945, secretly recruited Nazi scientists for American intelligence. The Pentagon wanted their research, no matter how it was obtained. Hubertus Strughold, the so-called father of space medicine, had supervised high-altitude experiments that killed prisoners. By 1947, too, he was working for the UBS Air Force in Texas, helping design life support systems for pilots. His past, classified. His salary, $4,500 annually, more than most American doctors earned. At Nuremberg, only 23 doctors faced the International Military Tribunal. The doctors' trial ran from December 9th, 1946 to August 20th, 1947. 7 received death sentences, 9 got prison terms, 7 walked free. That's out of hundreds who participated. Karl Brandt, Hitler's personal physician and architect of the euthanasia program, died by hanging on June 2nd, 1948 at Landsberg prison. But for every Brandt who faced justice, 10 others melted into civilian life. Josef Mengele, the angel of death himself, escaped to South America with help from Catholic ratlines. By 1949, he was living openly in Argentina under his real name, working as a carpenter. The Mossad tracked him for decades, but never caught him. He died in Brazil in 1979, having lived freely for 34 years after Auschwitz. His twin experiments, which killed over 3,000 children, informed no legitimate medical advance, pure sadism disguised as science. The pharmaceutical industry welcomed Nazi doctors with open arms. IG Farben, which produced Zyklon B gas for the death camps, was broken up by the Allies, but its executives received light sentences. Fritz Termeer, who oversaw slave labor at Auschwitz subcamps, served only 4 years in prison. By 1956 TAS, he was chairman of Bayer's supervisory board. Bayer, which had tested experimental drugs on concentration camp prisoners, became one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. The irony stings. Cold War paranoia accelerated Nazi recruitment. The CIA's MK-Ultra program, launched in 1953, built directly on Nazi research into mind control and psychological manipulation. Kurt Blom, who developed biological weapons for the Wehrmacht, was acquitted at Nuremberg in 1947. By 1951, he was consulting for the UES, Army Chemical Corps on biological warfare. His expertise in anthrax and plague deployment proved valuable against Soviet threats. Democracy made deals with devils. Some doctors rebuilt careers through sheer audacity. Hans Nachtsheim conducted genetic experiments on epileptic children at Brandenburg Euthanasia Center. After the war, he became director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Comparative Genetics. His pre-war reputation in genetics research overshadowed his wartime crimes. Academic institutions, desperate to rebuild scientific prestige, looked the other way. Nachtsheim published papers on hereditary diseases until 1962, citing his Nazi-era work without mentioning the murdered subjects. The Vatican's rat lines smuggled thousands of Nazis to safety. Bishop Alois Hudal operated from Rome, providing false papers and passage to South America. At least 30 Nazi doctors escaped through these networks. Aribert Heim, the butcher of Mauthausen, lived openly in Egypt for decades, working as a gynecologist in Cairo. He performed amputations without anesthesia on prisoners, timing how long they survived. Egyptian authorities knew his identity but granted him sanctuary. He died in Cairo in 1992, wealthy from real estate investments. Austria proved especially welcoming to former Nazi doctors. Of the 65 Austrian physicians who participated in euthanasia programs, only 3 faced prosecution. Heinrich Gross, who killed hundreds of disabled children at Am Spiegelgrund Clinic, resumed his career as a forensic psychiatrist. Vienna courts relied on his expert testimony for decades. He examined over 800 criminal cases, helping convict defendants while hiding his own crimes. Austrian medical boards protected their own. The German medical establishment reconstructed itself with Nazi veterans in leadership. Eduard Wirz, chief medical officer at Auschwitz, committed suicide in British custody in 1945, but his subordinates thrived. Friedrich Entres, who selected victims for gas chambers, received only a 10-year sentence. Hans Wilhelm König, who performed sterilization experiments, became a successful gynecologist in Hamburg. The German Medical Association never conducted systematic denazification. Former Nazis served as department heads, medical school deans, and hospital directors well into the 1970s. Some faced justice decades later. In 1961, Adolf Eichmann's capture in Argentina sparked renewed Nazi hunting, but medical war criminals proved harder to prosecute. Their crimes were often classified as scientific research, creating legal gray areas. Ernst Robert Grawitz, Reich health leader and architect of medical experiments, shot himself and his family in Berlin as Soviet forces approached in April 1945. Others weren't so accommodating. Simon Wiesenthal spent decades tracking Nazi doctors. His Vienna Documentation Center compiled files on over 3,000 medical war criminals, but extradition proved nearly impossible. South American countries, especially Argentina and Paraguay, refused cooperation. Mengelé's case became symbolic. Everyone knew where he was, but legal technicalities prevented arrest. Wiesenthal died in 2005, still hunting ghosts who had escaped justice. The pharmaceutical records tell the darkest story. IG Farben's archives, seized by Allied forces, revealed systematic testing of experimental drugs on concentration camp prisoners. Block 10 at Auschwitz served as a human laboratory for sterilization research. Bayer tested pain medications by deliberately infecting prisoners with diseases. These experiments violated every principle of medical ethics, but produced valuable data that informed post-war drug development. The industry buried these connections for decades. Medical schools slowly confronted their past. The University of Vienna, which expelled Jewish faculty in 1938 and welcomed Nazi racial theorists, began investigating its history in the 1980s. They discovered that half their anatomy specimens from 1938 to 1945 came from executed political prisoners and euthanasia victims. These bodies, used to train generations of doctors, were finally buried with dignity in 1998, 53 years too late. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Nuremberg trial records and declassified CIA documents. Now back to the story. The Ahnennerbe, Himmler's occult research division, employed dozens of doctors in pseudoscientific racial studies. August Hirt collected skulls from murdered Jewish prisoners for his anatomical collection at Strasbourg University, When Allied forces approached in 1944, he tried to destroy the evidence by dissolving bodies in acid. 86 corpses were discovered, still bearing Auschwitz tattoos. Hirt fled to the Black Forest and disappeared. His fate remains unknown. Werner Haider ran the Nazi euthanasia program that killed over 70,000 disabled individuals. After the war, he assumed the identity of Fritz Sawade and worked as a court psychiatrist in Schleswig-Holstein. For 13 years, he evaluated defendants' mental competency while hiding his role in systematic murder. When his true identity was discovered in 1959, he committed suicide in prison. But his psychiatric reports had influenced hundreds of court cases, potentially sending innocent people to prison based on Nazi expertise. The T4 euthanasia program served as a testing ground for Holocaust methods. Doctors like Irmfried Ebel perfected gas chamber techniques on disabled children before implementing them at Treblinka. Carbon monoxide chambers disguised as shower rooms, crematoriums designed for maximum efficiency. When T4 officially ended in 1941, these doctors transferred to death camps, bringing their expertise in mass murder. The connection between euthanasia and genocide was direct and documented. American intelligence files, declassified in the 1990s, revealed extensive recruitment of Nazi doctors. Project Chatter sought to develop truth serums using Nazi research on prisoners. Project Artichoke studied interrogation techniques pioneered at concentration camps. The CIA estimated that German medical experiments saved American researchers 10 to 15 years of development time. Morality took second place to military advantage. Cold War necessity justified collaboration with war criminals. West German medical licensure boards faced uncomfortable choices. Thousands of doctors had Nazi party membership, but complete denazification would have crippled healthcare. A compromise emerged. Membership alone wasn't disqualifying, but active participation in war crimes was. The problem: proving active participation required witnesses who were often dead and documents that were frequently destroyed. Most Nazi doctors simply claimed they were following orders or had no knowledge of criminal activities. Review boards, themselves composed of former Nazi doctors, proved remarkably lenient. The Ludwigsburg Central Office, established in 1958 to investigate Nazi war crimes, opened over 7,000 cases but achieved few convictions. Medical cases proved especially difficult. Victims were dead, witnesses scattered, evidence destroyed. Doctors claimed they were conducting legitimate research or providing medical care. The legal standard required proof of intent to kill, not just participation in deadly experiments. Most cases ended without charges. Justice delayed became justice denied. Some Nazi doctors achieved international recognition for post-war work. Ottmar Freiherr von Verschuer, Mengelé's mentor and architect of racial hygiene research, became a respected geneticist after the war. His pre-war twin studies, conducted on subjects who were later murdered, informed legitimate genetic research. The American Journal of Human Genetics published his papers well into the 1950s. Academic journals, eager for European research, ignored the murderous origins of his data. The Nuremberg Code, established in 1947 as a response to Nazi medical crimes, required informed consent for all human experimentation. But American researchers were simultaneously using Nazi data and recruiting Nazi scientists. The hypocrisy was staggering. While proclaiming new ethical standards, US intelligence agencies employed the very doctors who had violated every principle of medical ethics. The code applied to others, not to Cold War allies. Medical museums began acknowledging uncomfortable truths in the 1990s. The Pernkopf Atlas, a renowned anatomy textbook illustrated with bodies from Nazi victims, was removed from medical libraries worldwide. The illustrations were scientifically accurate but morally contaminated. Students had studied human anatomy using images of murdered political prisoners and Holocaust victims. The atlas represented the intersection of scientific excellence and ethical bankruptcy that characterized Nazi medicine. East Germany prosecuted Nazi doctors more aggressively than the West. The Waldheim trials in 1950 sentenced over 3,000 war criminals, including many doctors. But these trials were politically motivated show proceedings that violated due process rights. Defendants received minimal legal representation and faced predetermined outcomes. While West German leniency was morally questionable, East German vengeance was legally problematic. Justice remained elusive on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Some Nazi doctors achieved stunning career resurrections. Hermann Stever, who performed autopsies on resistance fighters while they were still warm from execution, became chairman of anatomy at Humboldt University in Berlin. His technique of examining hearts still beating after decapitation produced groundbreaking research on cardiac function. Post-war medical journals published his findings without mentioning the source material. Students learned human anatomy from his textbooks, illustrated with drawings of murdered prisoners. Steve died in 1966, honored as a pioneer of anatomical research. The dental profession harbored its own criminals. Hugo Blaschke, Hitler's personal dentist, identified corpses in the Führerbunker using dental records. But his assistant, Käthe Häusermann, who confirmed Hitler's death through dental identification, spent 10 years in Soviet gulags. Blaschke served only 2 years before resuming practice in Nuremberg. He treated American occupation officers while concealing his role in identifying Holocaust victims from dental remains extracted by camp doctors. Professional licensing boards asked no questions about wartime activities. Medical device companies profited from Nazi research. Siemens manufactured X-ray equipment used for sterilization experiments at concentration camps. After the war, they developed the first mobile X-ray units for American hospitals based on concentration camp designs. The company paid reparations to slave laborers in 1998, but never acknowledged using Nazi medical data in post-war products. Corporate memory proved selectively short when profits were involved. The Catholic Church's role in sheltering Nazi doctors extended beyond rat lines. Hospitals run by religious orders provided sanctuary for fleeing criminals. St. Raphael's Hospital in Hamburg employed at least 12 former Nazi doctors between 1946 and 1952. The hospital administrator, Father Wilhelm Berning, had blessed Nazi euthanasia programs during the war. Sacred and profane merged in protecting mass murderers from justice. Divine mercy apparently extended to medical war criminals. Yugoslavia conducted the most aggressive prosecution of Nazi doctors. The Belgrade War Crimes Commission tried 47 German and Croatian physicians between 1945 and 1948. 31 received death sentences, 16 got prison terms. The trials were swift, evidence overwhelming, sentences final. Nikola Nikolic, who performed live vivisections on Serb prisoners, was executed by firing squad in Belgrade on September 15, 1946. Tito's Yugoslavia showed no mercy for medical war criminals. Israeli intelligence pursued Nazi doctors with systematic determination. Operation Bernhard tracked down and eliminated several targets who had escaped formal justice. In 1960, Mossad agents found Herbert Kukurs, the butcher of Riga, in Montevideo. Though not a doctor himself, Kukurs had facilitated medical experiments on Jewish prisoners. His body was discovered in February 1965 with a note explaining his execution for war crimes. The message was clear. Nazi hunters would find their targets anywhere. Swiss banks laundered Nazi gold, while Swiss hospitals employed Nazi doctors. The Burg-Hölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich hired at least 6 physicians who had participated in T4 euthanasia programs. Switzerland claimed neutrality, but practiced selective blindness regarding war criminals seeking refuge. Bank secrecy laws protected Nazi assets, while medical licensing boards ignored criminal backgrounds. Neutrality proved profitable for Switzerland and deadly for justice. The Action T4 program's personnel files, discovered in East German archives in 1989, revealed the full scope of medical participation. Over 400 doctors and nurses worked in euthanasia facilities. Most survived the war and resumed civilian careers. These files contained performance evaluations rating doctors on their efficiency in killing disabled patients. Higher ratings led to promotions within the Nazi medical hierarchy. Bureaucracy turned murder into career advancement. Medical journals faced a reckoning in the 1990s. The New England Journal of Medicine discovered it had published 17 papers between 1946 and 1956 that cited Nazi research without attribution. The data came from hypothermia experiments at Dachau, high-altitude studies at Ravensbrück, and poisoning tests at Buchenwald. Editors had accepted the research as legitimate science from German colleagues. Peer review failed to catch the criminal origins of supposedly groundbreaking discoveries. Some Nazi doctors became Cold War intelligence assets. Walter Schreiber, chief of the Wehrmacht Medical Service, was recruited by the US Army in 1948 despite knowledge of his role in medical war crimes. He supervised biological weapons research at Fort Detrick, Maryland, using expertise gained from testing plague and typhus on prisoners. When his background became public in 1951, he was quietly transferred to Argentina. The CIA preferred embarrassing relocations to public trials. The German Red Cross harbored Nazi doctors throughout the post-war period. Ernst Robert Grawitz had served as Red Cross president while simultaneously directing medical experiments. After his suicide in 1945, the organization quietly integrated dozens of his subordinates into humanitarian work. Red Cross medical missions to Africa and Asia included former concentration camp doctors. The irony was deliberate. Men who had violated the Geneva Conventions now claimed to uphold humanitarian principles. Pharmaceutical patents filed by Nazi doctors remained valid after the war. Bayer held patents on experimental drugs tested on prisoners, including early antibiotic compounds and pain medications. These patents generated millions in post-war profits as antibiotics revolutionized medicine. Legal challenges to Nazi-derived patents failed repeatedly in American and German courts. Property rights trumped moral objections when corporate profits were at stake. The Vatican's silence on Nazi medical crimes enabled widespread escape and rehabilitation. Pope Pius XIV, who had remained silent during the Holocaust, refused to condemn doctors who had participated in mass murder. Vatican archives, sealed until 2019, revealed extensive knowledge of medical war crimes, but no action to prevent criminal escapes. Papal infallibility apparently didn't extend to moral judgment regarding Nazi doctors. Medical schools across Europe quietly removed Jewish faculty who had fled Nazi persecution while welcoming back German colleagues with criminal backgrounds. The University of Prague expelled Jewish professors in 1938, but rehired German faculty who had served in concentration camps. Academic politics trumped moral considerations as universities prioritized research prestige over ethical standards. The pursuit of knowledge excused collaboration with mass murderers. Some Nazi doctors faced extradition battles lasting decades. Andrija Artuković, known as the Butcher of the Balkans, supervised medical experiments in Croatian concentration camps. He fled to California in 1948 and worked as a bookkeeper while fighting extradition. The legal battle lasted 36 years before Yugoslavia finally obtained custody in 1986. He died in prison in 1988, having lived freely in America for 4 decades. The final revelation came in 2005. Construction workers renovating a Vienna hospital discovered a basement storage room filled with preserved organs and tissue samples. Carbon dating revealed they came from Nazi euthanasia programs. For 60 years, these specimens had been used for medical research and teaching. DNA testing matched some organs to victims whose families had searched for bodies since 1945. The discovery forced Austria to confront its failure to investigate post-war medical institutions. The organs were finally buried in a ceremony attended by victims, families, and government officials. Most Nazi doctors died peacefully in their beds, having lived full lives after committing unspeakable crimes. They raised families, built careers, earned respect. Their victims remained nameless numbers in historical records. Justice wasn't just delayed, it was deliberately avoided. The medical establishment, governments, and intelligence agencies chose expediency over ethics. The white coats were never truly cleansed. They just changed hospitals.